David, thank you for being here with me.
Thanks for the invite.
I think I'll explain the context within which we know each other, which is that you run this organization. I guess organization would be the word, called Evolving Men.
Yeah.
And you posted on a forum that we both hang out in a few months back, saying that you were starting a mastermind for guys who wanted to create men's circles in their local areas. And I saw that and I thought, yeah, I want to do that. And so we have gotten to know each other over the period of a few months in this monthly call. And you have been the leader and the guide in me setting up a men's circle in my local area, which has been an incredibly valuable thing, both for myself and for the guys who come along to it. I mean, it's been fascinating that almost everybody who's been through those doors had said, this really feels like something they wanted or needed, and that they themselves had even had the thought, wouldn't it be great if there was a space where we as men could just come and be and speak? And what we're doing really is just having a circle where we talk about what's going on in our lives and explore what it means to be a man and what it means to connect to purpose. Now, I think there is a kind of selection bias in that the people who turn up at this group are probably the people who are primed to want that anyway. However, there is still something very interesting that these men's circles and this interest in men's circles is popping up across the place, across Europe where we're based. The calls that we meet in the masterminds of guys from the UK and Austria and Finland and God knows where else. So I wonder if I might just ask if you have any thoughts on what's going on here with these men's circles and men coming together like this.
Sure. I mean, the first thing that comes up is that it's kind of interesting, the simplicity of how you described it, right? It's like we just come together as men and we just talk. And I mean, obviously we don't chit chat as much as we really create a space where we talk about the things that I think deep down we really want to talk about, but maybe don't have the courage to. But still, it's really simple. And there's something about that that I really like, that it seems like at least some of the solutions of the issues we're facing nowadays are in a way quite simple. So that's the first piece that comes up. So I've been in this men's movement for the past 2.5 years. And yeah, it's so cool to see how it's growing. It's still obviously very underground. Like when you talk to men, I'd say regular men, they're still like, what the fuck is a men's circle? And like, you know, all sorts of fantasies of that some, you know, guys holding hands and saying, you're great, I love you. So it's not yet mainstream, which I think is the goal of many people who are in this movement. And as you said, there is a deep yearning for community. There's a deep yearning for a different kind of culture among men. And there's a deep yearning for being able to identify as a man and that feeling good. Because I think most men, like, you know, nowadays, it's pretty normal for women to, you know, be proud to be a woman. For a man to like publicly say, I'm proud to be a man, is like, you're very quickly being called out as all sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, this even brings me to something we were discussing in our circle the other day. Around this idea of, it's sometimes said, well, why should one be aiming to be a better man or a better woman? Can't a person just aim to be a better person? Why use these genders that are sometimes seen as outdated at all? Why should I, as a person in a male body, have to identify with this thing as what a man might be? And yet it feels to me very, deep that I want to understand what it is to be a man and not just a person, which is not to say that it's prescriptive and that everybody who has the same body as me should want to be a man. However, there are a number of us, at the very least, who are interested in what this is, what it opens in the world, and how it might enable us to better show up for the people around us. And maybe that's one of the misconceptions as well around this men's circle thing as to what it is doing. Like, I've had mostly positive responses on social media in regard to me posting about the men's circle, but I've had one or two people say, I wouldn't touch your group with a barge pole, which was interesting in the very least. And I think there certainly are some less savory things going on with, I don't know what you'd call it, the manosphere, if you will. Resentful, angry men meeting up to complain about women or blame others for their problems, or blame the lack of traditional patriarchy for their problems. But that is not what is going on in these men's circles and in this men's movement that we're part of. It feels very creative and asking almost, how can we show up and serve as men? Not how can we work out who is responsible for our problems, but yeah, how can we support each other as brothers?
Yeah. Can I jump in there?
Yeah.
So a few things. First of all, I mean, I think these concerns about men's circle, I think they're valid. I think it's a very nuanced conversation to be had that I don't see in many places. Right? Like, yeah, I'll start there. So, yeah, I mean, what a valid thing to ask. Like, are we just recreating ideas of what it means to be a man? Like, man-made ideas that probably were created to sustain a certain kind of culture that I don't know if I agree with, right? So I think it's really important to ask that question and to neither go into yes, absolutely, we're doing that right away, and also not into no, absolutely not. Like, what we're doing is, it's like we're free of any kind of criticism. And then one piece that I found interesting that you said was about your body, like being in a male body, and then like that obviously there are more men coming together interested in exploring what does it mean to be a man. And so one thing that came up to me was, well, yes, and no other man has your body, right? Like, your body is very unique in so many ways. Like, I mean, there's so much to dive into, like just the amount of history you're carrying within your body of all your ancestors and all of your experiences and all of your choices, like all of that is alive in your body. And with that, yes, you're inhabiting a male body and you're standing in a lineage of men. And that comes with all sorts of things. For example, I recently had this chat with my partner where I was like, fuck, imagine how deeply it is ingrained in men's DNA to go to war, to die for some sort of cause that you believe in or not. So I think it makes a lot of sense to explore this question: what does it mean to be a man? What is like the baggage that comes with that? What is the beauty? What's like the like the life-serving, what are the life-serving elements that have been passed on to me from generations of men before me, and to learn to discern that, right? So we don't just say everything that I've been told about being a man is great, or everything that I've been told about being a man is wrong. Like, and I think this is one place I would like this conversation to kind of move towards. Is it's really interesting how challenging it is for people in general to be in the space in between polarizations, right? Like this space of okay, you say, there's something in being a man that really touches me, and I feel kind of a calling to really explore that, right? And there's a beauty to that, and I can so resonate with that. Can I at the same time also acknowledge that I'm pretty sure I've inherited some really shitty patterns that I think make a lot of sense to really examine and probably change, right? And then again, like, and then we have these polarized conversations, and to be honest, I even see them like in the men's circles and movements that we're a part of, that, for example, like postmodern feminists are the enemy, right? Like this is kind of our mind jumps towards simplifying things because it's easier to handle. Like we're living in a fucking complex world, and it's really freaking hard to be in this discomfort of not having certainty in any way, and that even what it means to be a man is constantly evolving. Like I will never arrive at a final answer of what it means to be a man, or how am I supposed to show up as a man. And yet our mind keeps trying to find that place. And so that's something that I'm really interested in creating spaces where we have the courage to stay in this kind of dance in between the poles. And that's the place where, for me, the body comes in, because somehow I find that the body can hold complexity better than our conditioned mind. Or put differently, if I'm able to really inhabit my body and feel everything that's going on, there's already so much contradiction going on in my body right now and in your body right now, that we can learn this capacity to hold all these different sensations that are happening at the same time. And with that, I sense that my mind gets more flexible. My mind starts to be able to kind of hold these polar opposites as well, and be like, okay, here's my habitual kind of tendency to go, I need to make one thing right and the other wrong, and here I am kind of standing in between. And so to wrap this up, just one more point.
Yeah.
That's a really essential part for me of masculinity, is this kind of like just like standing in the storm. And the storm can just be your inner life, and just being like, I'm with all of this. I'm present with all of this. I don't have solutions right now. I don't pretend to know more than I do. But what I choose to do is to be present with everything. It's such a powerful aspect for me of masculinity, which, just as a side note, does not mean just men, but for me, it's a quality that I associate with masculinity.
No, that was beautifully put. I mean, where I wanted to go is actually to ask, what does it look or indeed feel like to have the body amidst this complexity? What are you talking about there?
Can you say it again?
Like, what does it feel like to be sensing complexity in one's body in the way you've just described?
Right. Well, I mean, I can say, how does it feel for me right now? That's all I can say. And I can possibly say a bit about the past, but even there, like, yeah, just cautious not to generalize. Like, that's my unique experience and yours will be different. But what I can say is, as I said before, that there are a lot of different sensations happening at the same time that my mind doesn't understand. Okay, so I can just speak from my present experience. Is okay, I feel tingling in my hands, feel a bit of tension in my neck, a bit of tension in my jaw. Can feel right now my ass relaxing a bit and sitting a bit more solidly on a chair. There's some movement going on in my belly. There's a kind of something really joyful and playful in my chest. So there's all these things happening, right? And of course, like, whenever I express one of them, my mind comes up with a million ideas of why that's the case. Like, why am I experiencing this? And do I know that my mind is right? I have no freaking idea, right? Maybe, like it's possible that my mind understands, oh, you know, you feel tense here because you did that. But is life as simple? Do we have just these like linear relationships between things? No, probably not. Probably it's really complex, right? And so my practice leads me to, like, I keep coming back to my own body and to this place of, like, what if the most powerful place that I can inhabit is just to be present with everything that's going on without trying to understand it? Like, what if there's a flow of information in that that just goes beyond my mind? And in my experience, like, that often puts me in a place where, like, I've said this for fun a few days ago to a friend of mine, is like, I think sometimes people think I'm some sort of magician because they're like, I seem to have access to like information about them and about the space and stuff like that. They're like, whoa, how can you know this? And I'm like, everyone can. Like, our bodies are these incredibly intelligent, uh, I don't like to use the word machines, but organisms that have evolved over thousands and thousands of years, and we're just not using it for a good reason. Like, there's trauma and there's pain and there's conditioning and so on, but still, like, that space of learning to feel more and more of what's going on in your body, acknowledging that I probably don't understand why I'm experiencing all these things, but I can still learn. It's like a kind of transrational learning, if you want. Like, that's, it's almost like that's my only hope for us to move forward. Like, that's the only place I see us being able to grasp the how we've come here and what needs to change so that we can create a world that is sustainable and works for everyone.
It reminds me of that, I think it's Einstein quote about you can't change. I'm going to butcher this so badly, but you can't change the world with the same mind that created the problems that you're now dealing with. I forget
Yeah.
what it is exactly. The point being that we are in a certain place as people, as cultures, as a world, as a result of a certain way of doing things, and trying to solve the issues within the frame that has produced the issues is just leads to more of the same. And I think you're completely right that the body seems to have been this forgotten temple, if you will, that there is now value in excavating and reintegrating, perhaps. You know, and as you were talking, I was thinking about this dyad meditation exercise that you've taught me, which I ran with my men's circle the other day for the first time as we were doing our second meeting on Zoom. And it was great. I felt very, very present in the call. And the other guys, I think we had a great connection between us. And I mean, it is basically, to describe it, kind of what you just did in describing your sensations, but as a group, right? We sit and close our eyes and just have the space open, and anyone can describe sensations that they're feeling. And after a couple of minutes of that, I felt like I was no longer just in me. I was, because especially with my eyes closed and hearing the other guys say, I can feel a tingling in my fingers. And that makes me think, I can feel a tingling in my fingers. All of a sudden it's not just my body, but we are a body for a time. And it feels perhaps especially valuable now that more and more social interaction is happening via the computer, because we're all at least temporarily locked down. Yeah, the trick is that art of not just being up here, and what coming down here then enables to come out and express openly, and without perhaps a commitment to just stating something and it being right, but with a more explorative mindset, because that is what we do when we explore the body.
Yeah, it's there's so many things that are precious in what you said. One thing is, you were talking about this experience of connection, or like being part of something bigger than just your own organism, your own body, which is what we always are, right? Like for a long time, that's been kind of the just like a spiritual or esoteric perspective, like we're all one and we're all connected. But I mean, science is catching up, and I mean, teachers I very much appreciate talk about humanity as like one big nervous system, and there's more and more science that starts to see that as well, that like we're constantly affecting each other in ways that most of us are not aware of. But that doesn't mean that it's not there, right? And so for me, when I tune into my body, I become more aware of that. And it's actually one of the, like, the fact that we believe that we're completely separate is both a cause and a consequence of like what's wrong in the world, because that makes me behave in really weird ways. And if I really saw that I was like a piece of a larger organism, for example, trying to extract something from other pieces of the organism around me doesn't make sense any longer. What does make sense is taking good care of myself so that I can be a good, healthy part, kind of spreading aliveness and energy, right? So it's also not about sacrificing myself. That doesn't make sense either. And those are all things that are going on in our heads, like these kind of ideologies and theories, and like we don't need them. We like have all the intelligence that we need in our bodies. Now, one more piece that's really important for me here is I don't argue in any way that we should abandon our mind. Like our mind is a brilliant tool, especially if it is like seated in a grounded, relaxed, open body. I don't want to get rid of my mind. I love my mind. It's just when it doesn't have, and I mean, you had an amazing philosopher on this, or a researcher on this, on your podcast, Ian McGilchrist, who talks about the master and his emissary, and that's exactly it. Like if the mind is the master, it keeps on recreating problems that it's trying to solve. And so the body is kind of this piece that, in my experience, puts things more into order again.
And on the topic of McGilchrist, I mean, even his idea about this left and right hemisphere split, right? That the left hemisphere works by fragmentation and splitting things apart, where the right hemisphere has much more of a holistic, all-encompassing gestalt way of interacting with the world. And I mean, there's like crazy experiments that he describes of people who suffer right hemisphere brain trauma, and then wake up. Well, one result of that is losing the ability to move the left side of the body, but then also losing a certain way of perceiving. And so there's stories of patients who a doctor asks to lift their left arm. They've got right head trauma, and they can't move it. And the doctor says, "So you see, you can't move my arm." And the patient's saying, "Well, yeah, but that's not my arm." And it's like, what? Like that's attached to you, but they've lost that thing to experience that arm is part of them. It's just an arm that's in the bed. And similarly, I think there was another one about a patient, same trauma, who woke up in the middle of the night and was terrified because there was a woman lying in bed with her. Who was her? And McGilchrist's idea.
Yes, and I think in some way we're all experiencing this trauma.
Yeah, the body is an alien.
Yes, and other human beings are aliens to us.
So now I want to ask you, in the men's work you have done and continue to do, what would you say are some of the things you are noticing that men are regularly struggling with? And indeed, how is men's work and men's circles helping them?
That's a great question. So one is everything that we've just talked about, like feeling themselves, being self-aware in a healthy way. I mean, most of the most of the current personal development industry would not exist if more people in general would feel themselves. Because a lot of the seeking advice from outside is because I'm disconnected from the wisdom within. Like I don't trust, I'm not aware, or I don't trust the things that I see coming up from within. Right? And so I think that's something that men are maybe suffering even more from than women. This kind of, I cannot trust myself. I need to, like, in some way discipline myself to be a good human being. Like, I'm not good as I am. There's a lot of shame, a lot of shame. And, you know, I think I shared that on the mastermind, did I? Anyways, like I've been exploring shame a lot and how it affects my behavior and my expression, and finding ways to kind of counteract shame, which is a social emotion. Like, it's something that we learn. It's not a basic emotion that we're born with. So shame is a huge thing. And from that, just so many other things. I mean, struggling in relationships, like struggling to be vulnerable, struggling to meet all the different expectations that they're facing, like to be tough and soft and courageous and tender, and like all these confusing, again, mental kind of stimulations that are coming their way. Feeling empty and having no one to talk to about this. So feeling like, you know, the kind of lonely wolf that has to figure everything out by himself. Having to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. You know, this kind of dramatic hero that no one acknowledges but silently suffers for everyone. That's like quite a common theme. Yeah, and then finding their place in this constantly changing world. Like the ability to adapt, to learn. Those are more abstract. I mean, I can also go really more concretely, like being emotionally dependent from their partners, like not knowing how to kind of set boundaries and take care of themselves in relationship. Doing work that they're not enjoying, but not having the courage to kind of see how they might be able to change that. Obviously, relationship to their parents, especially fathers. I think absent fathers is something that most men and people in general are suffering from. Yeah, and I mean, that's more of an interpretation from my side, but just like handling the intensity that we're confronted with just by living in this crazy world. Like, how do I handle this? And especially people who are, and men who are more sensitive, like how do I handle, again, like all these conflicting things that I'm experiencing? That for me is very much related to a messed up world we're living in. Like, how do I make sense of that? What do I do with it? Yeah. And then obviously drug abuse, you know, distracting myself, withdrawing from the world. Those are like some of the more surface kind of ways of seeing what's really going on underneath.
Yeah, I see myself in much of it.
Yeah. Maybe one last is lack of brotherhood. It's also a huge one. Lack of healthy relationships to other men.
Right, and it feels like one of the most powerful things about just stepping into a men's circle initially is just being able to acknowledge some of the stuff on that checklist. Simply just saying it.
Yes.
Which I think I and some of the guys I know just haven't felt like we've been able to do for a long time. And
it's
then
just again, right?
yeah,
like, what, you also struggle with that?
It's not just me.
Yes.
It's not that's actually, everyone is walking around with something going on inside their head. It's not like it's a world filled with Spartan warriors with no emotions and like courage of
Exactly.
steel.
And see, if I look at this from a some people call it an interbeing perspective, like the perspective that we're all in some way connected, it makes sense that there's something going on in each of us. Like that informs us of the world that we're living in. It's not that there's something wrong with us and that we should try to find ways to calm the things down that we're experiencing. Like that's a huge misunderstanding for me of spirituality, how it's being practiced in the West a lot, is this kind of, oh, mindfulness so that I'm not as anxious. Well, maybe there's a reason you're anxious. Like maybe that informs us about a fucked up world we're living in. And maybe if we acknowledge more that all these experiences that we're having are not dysfunctional, they're actually functional expressions of a dysfunctional world. And we're just like mirroring that. And so when we start taking that seriously, instead of like medicating and just living up in our minds and trying to figure everything out from there, we actually have the capacity to build a world that actually works for us, because we have an amazing feedback system that constantly tells us, is that working, is that not working, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reminded of a phrase I sometimes use to describe spiritual paracetamol. Using practices and beliefs as a way of just anesthetizing. It's a tricky word to say. I hope people get what I'm saying. I mean, I guess now we're onto the topic of this perhaps fucked up world. It might be interesting to explore what's going on with this virus a bit, and how, in fact, I mean, I'll just shed like the men's circle I've run. We've now met twice since going into lockdown, and those of us who have been able to show up have like been incredibly grateful to one another that we actually have this space that we can sit down for an hour and a half in front of the computer. And I mean, it's been fascinating to me because I'm quite a young guy, but some of the guys are a bunch older and they've got kids and families, and now they're at home with, used to being going out and being the provider, if you will, and now everyone's at home, and there's a whole mesh of relationships that aren't used to being in such close proximity, and having the men's circle, one's brothers, as a place to just go, and it's not escape, it's something other than escape, right? It's like process. To have a space, like an intersubjective, interpersonal place to process, as opposed to just going off into like a private retreat and going for a walk for oneself, or meditating alone. And I think it was the same when we met in our mastermind the other day. There was a real feeling of how valuable it is that we're sitting down there. And I know you've been doing other calls for people, not even related to men's work exactly. There was one with a bunch of women in it, and we were just coming together to say, okay, what's going on with COVID? How is it affecting us? Is there anything we can do to show up and to help, but also to not feel the pressure to? And that feels incredibly valuable. And I don't know exactly what the name for it is, because we haven't necessarily been doing it in society up to this point. People hang out with their friends, but not with a purpose of processing a certain thing that's going on. And that feels like, amidst this chaos and this confusion, perhaps something that I'm hoping that we can learn to do. And that hope is partly involved in me hoping that I can learn to do this and lead people in sharing these spaces together.
Yeah, good points. And just gonna pick out a few if you're okay with that.
Yeah, go.
So one is, again, this is kind of noticing the simplicity, right? It's like, wow, how profound it can feel to just come together and express what's going on. Who would have thought? Even without even coming up with solutions. Like it's just this kind of, here's what I'm experiencing and I'm being received in that. And suddenly my nervous system goes like, oh, it's like it's coming back to its more natural state, which is that of being relaxed and open and in relationship. And so that's a huge piece of what you were describing for me is we're like in our modern culture, we're mostly not in relationship. And we think that's normal. Like we think it's normal, and or put the other way around, like we think it's kind of weird and extraordinary to need other people and to need the support of other people, especially as men. Because I don't know, maybe like we cannot mentally explain to ourselves like why it feels so much better to share what's going on when I'm in a group with a bunch of people rather than just doing it by myself. But obviously it does something, right? So that's one piece, is the coming into relationship and just understanding more about our human setup, and that we're social animals and that we need this, and that we need a kind of, again, a kind of space that goes beyond just like a exchange of thoughts. And when you tune more into your body, you can actually sense that, like you can sense there's an exchange going on that's just way beyond words, like that, where it's not about, I don't know, finding agreement or getting new ideas. It's about like a deeper sense of relationship. So that's one piece that's coming up. The other I just want to name, since like when we're talking about this current situation with COVID-19, is I don't claim to be an expert in any way on the situation and on the virus. I've done my fair share of informing myself. And what I'm most interested in exploring is this kind of like, what does it do to our minds and bodies, this situation, and how do we respond? What are our habitual patterns, and how can we respond in healthier ways? I think that's something that's very valuable to explore, regardless of whether, you know, the current situation is mostly being exaggerated or actually is far worse than we think. Like there's so many unknowns, and we can get so lost in trying to get, like we were talking about in the very beginning, like I want to know exactly what it is. I want to have this kind of certainty and say this is right and this is wrong. And of course, like it's not wrong. I'm also not saying that we should, you know, go into this kind of relativism of like, well, everything goes. No, but just to see like we're in a situation where I think no one really knows what's going on and how things are going to turn out. Some people have ideas, but that's it. And so now we're in a space that's filled with uncertainty. Cool. What do we do now? Like what are the healthy and unhealthy responses that people show up with? And I think one healthy response is to connect more. It's this kind of urge to be with others in the situation and to reach out. And it's that like it's not a mental thing. It's not like people are thinking like, here's the current situation, here's what will be a good. It's like it's more instinctual. It's like there's a situation that's challenging, so I want to draw closer the people that are important to me. And I think that's super healthy. And that's this kind of quality of being in relationship that I think we desperately need. And we desperately needed before this current situation as well. We just maybe weren't so aware of it.
There's a few pieces coming to mind here. I mean, one of the things that someone said at the very first men's circle I ran. He said, "This is amazing. It's better than therapy." And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, maybe the reason that therapy exists is because we don't have spaces like this anymore.
Yes, of course.
It's like we, for a long time, were tribal. We were nomads. We went around in small groups where everybody knew each other very well. And as men, we would be out hunting and sleeping around a campfire beneath the stars.
Yeah, and I mean, from my knowledge, probably not just hunting, like probably also a lot of foraging. Like it's also interesting where we kind of retrospectively create certain narratives that support ideas of what that we have around being a man. And also here, like, I don't claim that it's completely wrong, but for example, I've been reading Sapiens by Yuval Harari, and so the way he talks about us is like it's in a far less heroic way of hunting, like we were kind of scavenging for dead animals after some lion killed them and the birds ate some of it, like we ate the rest. This kind of way. And of course we did some hunting as well, but just wanted to bring that in as an interesting
I think you make a good point about how easy it is to romanticize the past.
Yes.
Which is it's a trap. But however, the point I think is about the relationship that exists during that, and how I think we developed as beings in those environments for most of our evolutionary history, whether or not they were glorious or they were actually like we were hyenas upon the plains, but with walking on 2 legs instead of 4. And it also puts me in mind of conversation I had with Sebastian Junger on the podcast, journalist, wrote this amazing book called Tribe, one of the most like profound books I've read about about conflict. But one of the central ideas is how American soldiers who went off to fight in the wars in the Middle East came home and wanted to go back. And it wasn't because life was it's not about like wanting to be in war, but it's about the brotherhood and the relationship that exists among brothers in a high intensity life and death environment where survival every day means total dependency on those around you, and then returning to a society where everything is safe and everybody is isolated from one another unless they take efforts to break out of that.
Yeah. I mean, like I noticed a doubt coming up about this kind of impulse of wanting to go back to war just being like a healthy remnant of good old tribal times. I imagine that there's also something about, well, modern society is really complex and being in war is quite simple. Like you have a clear task, you have a clear enemy. Like that's what we're good at. That's what we've learned for a long time. And it doesn't solve the problems that we're facing right now. Like if you treat this virus right now as an enemy, you just don't get it. You don't get that this virus is mirroring things about our system that are messed up, and that the virus is not really the problem. Of course, like we need to like find ways to make sure that not too many people die from this, but it's like the virus is not the enemy. It's just showing us some really fascinating things about how our globalized world works. And so that then we take a different approach, and our mind is just like, our conditioned mind is used to like thinking in terms of war, thinking in terms of right and wrong and good and bad. And when we're in that, we feel this kind of, I mean, it's easier that way. Life is just easier.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it is very apparent that many of the people people I know, I see on social media, do use the language of war to describe what we're in at the moment.
Yes, it's all around.
Mm.
That's for example, that's a great and just to kind of cite where I have this from. This is something that Charles Eisenstein talks about a lot. He's a cultural philosopher from the US, and he talks about this war mentality and how, for example, looking at our current climate crisis or climate situation, that like fighting CO2 emissions, that's just a way oversimplified way of looking at this. Like we cannot solve the situation by just cutting CO2 emissions. That's ridiculous. It's a ridiculously oversimplified way of looking at it, and it reflects how our mind works. And this kind of, even like, what do we measure and what do we don't measure? That's already an expression of how our mind works. And so that's going to limit what we're seeing and what we're not seeing. What are the relationships we're unaware of certain ecosystems that we think, oh, they're not so important because they don't whatever, like they don't take in as much CO2 that then kind of we can subtract from our emissions. But maybe these ecosystems are actually in some other more complex ways really, really, really important for
Hmm. Yeah, I mean it's bringing me back to McGilchrist actually, and the left hemisphere bias, wanting to split things up and then
the Earth. Yes.
treat things as isolated objects.
Yes.
And that is, I suppose, that is the warfare mentality. Even the enemy is no longer a, an organism, a complex organism. It is a thing for which there is one destiny, which is to defeat it.
Yes.
And I suppose the other thing that lurks behind that is the fantasy that things will be all right once it's gone.
Exactly. It's like once I kill the enemy, all that's left is good. Yeah, right. As if that has ever worked.
And that's such an easy trap to fall into on a personal level as well. I think.
Yes. On so many levels, like, and and there's no one is to be taken out of this pattern, like no political side or party or like I don't know if I've ever seen a politician really stepping out of this paradigm. I think some people try, but then again, you also have to kind of meet people where they are. Like we cannot talk about unity and we're all connected and people will be like, yeah, you're so right. That's just not the state of mind that most people are in. So of course, you also need to kind of be aware of that. But yeah, I mean, that's just an example of the complexity we're living in, right? If some really smart person who would understand a lot about the world, and there are people like that, would just like say to the world, hey guys and girls, like here's the situation, here's the complexity that we're facing, these are the problems, these are the things we need to address, this is where we can really change, these are our possibilities. Who would listen?
I'm mindful of the fact you said you needed to or wanted to wrap up by 3:00, and you're referring to your 3:00, I presume.
Yes. So yeah, let's just take another like 5 to 10 minutes to kind of find an end.
Yeah, sure. I mean, on the political point, right? I think politics itself is conducted as if it's a battle.
Yes.
When there's two teams and one is either on one team or the other. I remember I struggled with this for so long growing up. I was like, I don't know if I'm a left wing or right wing. There's clearly something wrong with me. I need to work it out. It's like trying to put a round peg into a square hole, as they say. And I think that is perhaps the war mentality of simplification and then not implementation. The word's not coming to me. And so here we are. How do we move forward into the complexity of the body, the intersubjective being? The space where we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we know something is happening. It's like right now I'm talking, I don't really know what's coming out of my mouth anymore. I'm just rambling, but I feel quite comfortable with it.
Nice. Well, I mean, I think one thing that helps me a lot, especially in well, always, is how I view the world and how I tend to respond to what's going on heavily depends on my inner state. And that does not mean in any way that all our problems are just illusions, blah, 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 blah. Like that's not, I'm not spiritual bypassing, but like I can, as I said in the beginning about this healthy quality of masculinity, like I can stand in the intensity and be like, fuck, there's a lot going on in this world right now. And I do not have the answers to everything that's going on. And I'm here and I'm well regulated, right? It's like I'm grounded. I feel myself. I feel my body. I feel connected to the ground. I kind of have a sense that like some of my experience is not just like my personal experience, but it's like me being part of the larger web of life. And I'm here, I'm available. That's something I can always choose to move towards. And so that's very different from the mindset that we're mostly in, is this kind of, here's a problem, let's find a solution as quickly as possible. That usually comes from a very disconnected place, I think a lot of times out of fear. Like I'm scared of the place that I'm in right now. I don't have time to calm down. I don't have time to regulate myself. I don't have time to kind of orientate, like, oh, where am I? Like, what is it that's really going on? Like, what's going on beyond the just most obvious symptoms? And so, like, that's a huge part of my practice and what I just share with anyone who's interested, really, is this kind of like, I don't have the solution or the answer in any way. And I probably claimed it sometimes in the past more than was true. But really, what I can offer is I can offer my presence. I can offer the information that's coming through me. So I don't need to pretend to be any smarter or bigger or more evolved than I am. That's already like part of the problem that we're all in. Like we think that we need to be somewhere else to solve the problems that we're in. Maybe not. Maybe we really need to slow down and kind of see all the information that's already available. And maybe it's going to look very different than our mind thinks that we're going to solve the current problems. I don't know.
I mean, I wanted to ask as a last question, if people are listening and they're interested in the sort of stuff we've been speaking about, where might they go or what might they do? And I feel like you've actually somewhat answered that. But do you have any thoughts to add?
I mean, they can send me an email if they want. It's david@evolving-men.com. You can go on Facebook to facebook.com/manevolving. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of other people that I really appreciate and follow that maybe you can just put in the show notes. Like I think some of them I actually cited, like Charles Eisenstein, also another spiritual teacher, Thomas Hübbe. So I think reaching out in a way, like listening to stuff like this that you resonate with, that you feel like on some level you know that something deeper is being addressed than what most people are talking about, I think that's a really smart thing to do. Don't listen to, I mean, there's just so much crap going, even more crap right now going on online than before, I think. And just like a wholehearted recommendation, be kind of picky of what information you really let inside. Don't spend too much time on social media because it's going to eat you up and like you're going to feel terrible in your nervous system. So kind of choosing your sources of information wisely and taking good care of yourself, I think is really important right now. And then, of course, if you resonate with what I'm saying, then find ways to connect.
Nice one. Let's wrap up there.